boy. And the next guest who we're bringing on now is filthy rich when it comes to knowledge. It is NFL.com's Bucky Brooks. Bucky, thanks for taking some time to join us today. How you doing?
I'm good. How you guys doing?
Great.
We are doing good. Appreciate you joining us here on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. We talked about your article last week, Bucky, when you did your all-breakout defensive team for 2023, and Grant Delpit, the Brown safety, was on that list. We read through your explanation. We discussed it ourselves. What do you see from Grant Delpit, and why do you think this year, 2023, will be the year he goes from being a solid contributor in the Browns secondary to a potential breakout star in this league?
Well, I mean, I think it's part of the maturation process. I think now he's entered a point where he kind of feels good about what he's doing. He knows exactly how to play the game. He has enough reps under his belt that he understands how to put himself in a position to make plays. But then I think the new scheme will also help him. With Jim Schwartz coming in, giving him an opportunity to be real aggressive. Schwartz is, look, he's already talked about being a team that brings 5 or more players all of the time. And so that's going to create opportunities for turnovers and takeaways. And so with Delpit going all the way back to his time at LSU, the guy knows how to see ball, get ball. And so when you put that kind of defender behind the talent that Cleveland has up front, he should be able to make a ton of plays. I'm looking forward to it.
You know, Bucky, one of the things that we were talking about on the show a couple of weeks ago was, you know, at the time when Deshaun Watson, if you go back and you rewind the clock and you go back and you look at his trajectory in the playoff game where Patrick Mahomes comes back from the huge halftime deficit. At that time, Deshaun Watson was looked at in that same stratosphere. He was looked at as a guy who has some of the same characteristics, some of the same traits, and thought about he had that same upside. You fast forward to today, and now it seems like there's a perception because of the 6 games and the layoff that he does not have that same ability to get back to that point. What do you think his trajectory is in terms of making it back to the place where he is mentioned in that top 5 type rarefied air in terms of quarterbacks?
Well, one, he certainly is a top 5 talent. He's been a top 5 talent since he stepped in the league. His last season in Houston, he was outstanding. And on a 4-12 team, and he put up like numbers that you don't typically see from a guy who's quarterbacking a losing squad. Taking the year off certainly hurt because he had to work through the rust. Missing 10 or so games last year, the suspension hurt because he couldn't get in rhythm in a new offense, in a new scheme. But I would say the biggest part that probably hurt Deshaun is the fact that, and I will equate it to when LeBron James went to Miami and everyone was mad at LeBron after the decision. And LeBron tried to play the role of the villain. LeBron had never been in that role. He had always been beloved. Well, Deshaun Watson enjoyed a similar plight. This is a guy that has always been beloved by the community wherever he was. Having to be caught up in the situation that he was in, the hate and the vitriol that he was getting from the outside. Look, man, it's hard for someone who's never had to deal with that kind of hate to play in the midst of that. I was in Jacksonville that first preseason game when he ran out and he was booed. He's never had to deal with that kind of stuff. I think now he's probably more comfortable in his own skin where he can kind of refine and rediscover who he was as a person and player. And I think we'll see a better version of Deshaun Watson now that he has kind of worked through some of that stuff.
I want to ask you about Myles Garrett. We spent about 20 minutes talking about Myles at the start of the show. And it just feels sometimes like there's another gear that he has to get to. Or is that being unfair to him because he's such a terrific player already?
Nah, look, I've seen this firsthand. So when I was working with the Carolina Panthers, we had Julius Peppers.
Yeah.
And Julius Peppers was one of the best pass rushers that you could find. But we always wanted more because he made the game look so easy. And I think sometimes what you do is you don't appreciate how talented the player is that you have because you're always hoping that they can give you even more than what they're giving you. Myles Garrett is a superstar, much like Julius Peppers was. And so the thing that you're talking about, I mean, I'm looking at the screen, he has 16 sacks.
Yep.
And we're talking about what else could he do?
Yep.
I just think sometimes when guys are so talented and it make it look so easy that you feel like they haven't completely emptied the bucket, well, maybe he's just that talented, and maybe he is just able to get his business done without exerting the kind of energy that it takes others to do half of the production, half of the performance that they're able to give.
That's a great point. And Bucky, we were talking about Myles earlier. We were going through the numbers of where we thought it would be a successful season or a disappointment in terms of sack numbers. And we all sat up here and was like, well, if he doesn't get 16, it's a bad season. It's a disappointment. We look around the league.
And that's insane.
One guy last year had more than 16 sacks. Nick Bosa had 18 and a half. And that's just the bar he set for us. Speaking of bars and expectations, though, we here in Cleveland, and I know we come from a fan perspective, think the Browns roster is supremely talented. One of the best top to bottom 53-man rosters in the league when they end up making cuts and coming at all the different position groups. There's only one that I think we look at and say it might not be at least league average or better. From an outsider perspective, do you think Cleveland has one of the more talented rosters in the NFL top to bottom?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's been the thing. And I think that's why everyone was a little surprised and perplexed last year when it didn't kind of play the way that we thought it would play out. The suspension certainly was a part of that. But no, the expectations in my mind are that the Browns will be one of those dark horse contenders that emerges. We've seen it the last couple of years. We saw Jacksonville kind of rose up. We've seen it in previous years where the Cincinnati Bengals came out of nowhere and became a Super Bowl team. The Cleveland Browns should be in that kind of conversation. When you look at the talent that they have offensively, from the offensive line to the running back and Nick Chubb to the playmakers they have on the outside to Deshaun Watson, if he returns to form, they have enough offensively to get it done. But I think the defensive part is where you have an opportunity to take this team from good to great. And what Jim Schwartz is able to do with the people that they have. Za'Darius Smith picking him up was a huge get because now you have a veteran presence opposite of Myles Garrett, someone that kind of understands how to play the game, someone who's going to be who's going to buy into the stuff. We heard the stuff get sideways a little bit with Jadeveon Clowney. Well, now you have a defensive front line that can do it. Secondary is loaded. You have playmakers at the second level. So, yeah, this team should be a team that you talk about 10 or 11 wins at a minimum based on their talent. And then it's about putting it together, getting hot at the right time, and playing great football down the stretch.
You know, when we look at the AFC, we talk about the roster and how great the Browns roster looks on paper. However, you go down and you look at the other AFC teams, and, I mean, I've never seen a collection of quarterback play. Like, I mean, you look at from the top of the, you know, the food chain with Patrick Mahomes to even guys that you're looking at, you know, with Derek Carr and guys like that are very capable of winning games and putting up numbers. Just right now in context, how good is this quarterback, you know, class and quarterback, you know, conference in totality when you're talking about the AFC?
It's hard, man. It's tough. It is going to be tough because it's an arms race in the AFC. When you think about the quarterbacks that are just there, we can talk about Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. Trevor Lawrence is there. Somewhere you got to throw Aaron Rodgers in the mix. Tua Tagovailoa, when healthy, has been in that conversation. Russell Wilson is expected to bounce back under Sean Payton. We talk about Deshaun Watson. I mean, we're talking about everywhere. There are all these quarterbacks. And so, man, the gauntlet that you have to run through to climb to the top of the AFC is tough. And you not only have to have a quarterback, but you got to have the playmakers and the defense to go with it. So, yes, it is a very competitive deal, a very competitive landscape. And so everyone who's kind of predicting who's going to be whom is really hard to see because when we play it out, I mean, it's crazy. And I didn't even mention Lamar Jackson. That's how crazy it was. I didn't even mention Lamar Jackson. So just think about all of those quarterbacks that we're running down and how, man, you got to be in line. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance in the AFC.
So when you mention all these teams and all these quarterbacks, somebody's going to fall. Somebody's going to not meet expectations. Is there a team in your mind in the AFC that is most vulnerable to disappoint?
I would say like the hype around the Jets, I would be careful. I would be careful because you have an older quarterback, a quarterback that's 40 years old. A couple years ago, he had back-to-back MVPs, but last year he wasn't a world beater. And the only thing that I would say is with the Jets haven't been to the playoffs in 12 years. It's been a long time since we've seen the Jets on the postseason. And so when Aaron Rodgers comes over, yes, he can give that knowledge and wisdom and expertise, but if they need him to carry them, I don't know if he's at this stage. So I'll worry about the Jets being celebrated as a Super Bowl darling. You might want to go easy. They need the rest of the team to come up and make sure they hold their end of the bargain, not so much on Aaron Rodgers.
Well, you know what, the area where I love watching you most is you do an excellent job of breaking down the NFL draft. And, I'm already looking ahead. I love when you guys give the way too early predictions on these. But I tell you what, there's some ball players out of this next round. One of the guys we see in Ohio as Buckeye fans, Marvin Harrison Jr., him and the quarterback from USC, Caleb, what's his name? Last name?
Caleb Williams.
Caleb Williams.
And so, when you talk about some of these prospects, would those guys have been top names this year, or what are they kind of mixing? Because I've heard a lot of people talk about how dynamic the class is next year.
There was conversation that if Caleb Williams was in this draft, he would be number one. And I think that's the expectation coming in terms of quarterback play. He has been described, and I can kind of fall in line with it. They say he's very much like Pat Mahomes in terms of the magic that he brings to the team. Remember, Pat Mahomes at Texas Tech was a bit of a wild card, a gunslinger. He has kind of become the great Pat Mahomes that we've seen in the NFL. Well, they're talking about Caleb Williams being the Pat Mahomes that we're seeing. Magical in terms of working off the script, but also discipline and detail when working on the script. The athleticism that you see, he can run it, he can throw it, he can do all these things. So he's the real deal. Drake May, coming from North Carolina, I'm partial because that's my school. Having played there, I know his dad. His dad was just graduated before I got to Chapel Hill. And Drake May is legit. He is the prototypical franchise quarterback that everybody wants. Outstanding kid, great football character, a ton of talent, has underrated athleticism. Remember, he comes from a family full of ballers. His older brothers played basketball. Luke May played basketball at Chapel Hill. He had another brother play baseball at Florida. So he gets it and thrives on the big stage. And so those quarterbacks are excellent. The wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr., man, I don't even know what to say, because when you think about the players that have come out of Ohio State, the wide receivers in particular, I mean, they have produced A-level NFL players. Well, Marvin Harrison Jr. may be the best one that we've seen come out of there. You can talk about the pedigree with his Hall of Fame dad, but he's different than his dad because he has supersized physical dimensions. He has playmaking ability. He has done it in a major way already. This year should be fascinating to watch him continue to grow. Man, people loosely talked about him being a top 10 last year when you just laid eyes on him. Maybe he's the next wide receiver that we go into the top 5.
For anyone out there who doesn't know, and I just learned this right now, I didn't realize Drake May was Luke May's little brother. Like Luke May, the guy with the game-winning shot in the national championship for UNC. I didn't realize that was his little brother.
Yeah, that's his little brother.
I was this minute old when I found out. For anyone out there that doesn't know, Bucky, you played in the league for 5 different teams. You had 2 stints in Green Bay. You were a defensive back. And we had Greg Newsome, the Browns defensive back, on the show earlier this week. And he talked about the scheme change between Joe Woods last year, Jim Schwartz this year, how Jim Schwartz has him playing in all these different roles. He didn't like playing in the slot last year because he was essentially a run-stopping guy, and he's more of a pass coverage guy. From your experience in the NFL, how much can a defensive coordinator, and schematically speaking, change the way certain players are utilized, especially in the secondary for a guy like Newsome or Denzel Ward or Martin Emerson Jr.?
I mean, it can matter a ton. It depends on the philosophy of the coordinator. Look, man, this game is about players, not plays. Your job as a coordinator is to take your players and put them in the best spot where they can make all the plays. And so whatever playbook that you bring to the table, that's great. You have to take the scheme that you want to use, but you want to make sure that you're enhancing the skills of the talent that you inherit. And so when I look at the secondary and Denzel Ward and Newsome and those guys, like, talented enough to do a bunch of different things, whether it's man, whether it's zone, playing inside and outside. Sometimes for high-end players, you got to challenge them in a different way. And if you give them a little more ownership, it makes them respond at a higher level. And so I would assume, because Jim Schwartz has been around great players for a long time, he's going to challenge those guys to kind of up the ante a little bit, put a little more on their plate, maybe have them take some ownership in the play calls, some automatic front end coverages where based on the formation or the team they're playing, they may check the certain things upon sight. So that allows the players to have more ownership, and normally you get more buy-in, you get better production.
Bucky, I'm just wondering, obviously it feels like there's a lot of pressure on everybody in Cleveland to win this year. Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, there could be a lot of changes if this thing goes sideways. Around the league, what's the view of Kevin in terms of a head coach? I've become sort of the Kevin apologist. I really like him. I think he's really good. I think he's gotten the most you can get out of the quarterbacks he's been given. But I'm just wondering the temperature of him around the league. How is he viewed?
I mean, I think everyone views him as a solid coach. Obviously, you can't have the success that he had early on without being a solid play caller and organizer and those things. Now, what everyone wants to know is, does he have the ability to take a talented roster and make them a great team? That is hard because you can have all these talented individuals, but can you get them to play together? Can you keep them in line? Can you make sure that everyone's getting the ball when they need to touch it? Is Nick Chubb getting his touches? Amari Cooper? What about David Njoku? That's a lot to manage as a coach. And then when you're the coach and you're the offensive play caller, do you have enough about you to also pay attention to what the defense is doing? And so in the role that he's at when he's the offensive play caller, he needs an experienced defensive coach so he basically can have Jim Schwartz be the head coach of the defensive side of the ball. So now he can focus his sights on making sure that the offense is operating at a high level, and then he comes back and kind of manages from afar. And so sometimes, man, as a young head coach, a new head coach, it takes you a while to figure out, here are my strengths as a coach, here are my weaknesses, make sure that I have my staff comprised of enough guys that really enhance my strengths and kind of minimize some of the weaknesses that I may have as an overseer.
When you're talking about roster building and turning great players into a great team, they're going to the Greenbrier in West Virginia for a week or so at the start of camp. How much of that is hokey, silly, and how much of that can legitimately help the culture?
It can legitimately help because what you're trying to do is eliminate the distractions. And so we all love our families and all that other stuff. But what you want to do is, as you're building the team, you want guys to have to spend that time together 24/7, being around each other, figuring out how people tick, having those intimate conversations in meeting rooms about your why. Why do you play the game? What is it bigger than just the check? Can you get everyone to kind of buy into this stuff that you were trying to do in a high school level, but now you're doing it with pros and you're doing it with grown men? And so sometimes you want to get away from everything so you can go back to the essence of why you play the game and why you're putting the team together so that guys can play for one another. Because if they're willing to play for one another, that connectivity, that continuity, that chemistry can lead to a lot of success.
You know, Bucky, we look at traditional offense. Kevin Stefanski, a lot of 12, 13 personnel, tight ends, and we ran the ball a lot. And I think that was because it worked to the skill set of what we had, Jacoby Brissett and then Baker Mayfield prior to that. Now that the offense is going to be a little more wide open, there's this natural progression to think that Nick Chubb in the running game will be minimized. However, you know, when you do have, you know, a passing quarterback, we think that the run game can help the quarterback, but also a good quarterback can help the run game. How could you know, Nick Chubb be folded into this offense, and what does Deshaun Watson mean for a running game that may have lighter boxes because of the threat of the run with Deshaun Watson in his arm?
You know, so it'll be interesting to see how Kevin Stefanski plays this out. So if you go back to the essence of what Stefanski is, he is a loose disciple of Mike Shanahan by way of Gary Kubiak, where if you go back and look at Gary Kubiak, they're going to run the football. They're going to run the football. They're going to hit it with outside zone. They're going to stress the defense. They're going to complement that with bootleg and misdirection, play action to get shots. And so even though this offense may appear to be more wide open, is deeply rooted in the run game and play action. And so if they're at their best, I think you will see a mix of some of the stuff that San Francisco has been able to do with the run game and how they're able to get the ball to the playmakers on the outside. You'll see some shot zone stuff where they try and push the ball down the field while everyone is kind of lured to the line of scrimmage to deal with Nick Chubb. And then I think they will play a pick your poison game. Do you want to deal with Nick Chubb or do you want to deal with Deshaun Watson? But early in the year, opposing defenses are going to test Deshaun Watson to see if he's all the way back. If he can show opposing defenses that he's all the way back, then later in the year, you'll see Nick Chubb get loose. But early, look for teams to really challenge Deshaun Watson and see if he can return to the player that he once was. And if he proves that, then you'll see Nick Chubb go crazy at the end of the year, racking up 100-yard games.
Bucky, we got 2 questions left. The first one comes from our producer, Pearl.
Hey, Bucky, first off, man, thank you for joining us on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. you know, we professionals around here. We don't do fanboy activity, but I got to give you your flowers. You're one of my favorite analysts, man. I have a lot of respect for your work. I can see the passion. I can see the integrity that goes into everything that you do. So it's an honor to have you on our show. Speaking of your work, can you tell us about the Move the Sticks podcast? I haven't had a chance to watch the episode from or listen to the episode from yesterday about the top 10 corners, but how much fun are you having doing that podcast?
It's been great. You know what I'm saying? Like DJ and I go way back. We were scouts together. Like when I was just in the business. And so we had a friendship. That friendship has kind of played out on wax with the podcast. And I think now, because we have so many years together, we can finish each other's sentences. And the great thing is we can have disagreements in terms of team building philosophy or the way that we view players, but we always are able to kind of give different perspectives. And so, look, man, I like the podcast space. I think we've done a really good job kind of finding our lane. And so I expect us to continue to do great stuff. But no, it's a ton of fun to be able to talk about the game, to talk about it and take some of the stuff that we've learned from great coaches, great executives and team builders and kind of share with the masses. I think that's been the best part of the gig.
Yeah, Earl's right. The Move the Sticks podcast with Bucky Brooks, Daniel Jeremiah, one of the best in the business and one of the most entertaining podcasts. Bucky, thanks again for coming on. We'll get you out of here on this, but we had this discussion, I would say 3 weeks ago before the show, and it's a bunch of guys who did not play in the NFL. Tyvis wasn't here, so he did play, but he wasn't here. Who the second best cornerback of all time was? We all agreed it was Deion, but the four of us sitting here were going back at who was number 2. Now, you played the position in the league, so I'm curious your take.
Second best.
If Deion's one, who's number 2?
Let's make sure you believe Deion's one.
Assuming you think Deion's
right.
Like
your senses.
Oh, no. Gosh, man, I would say he's certainly number 1. But, man, there's so many guys because there's so many different ways that you can think about it. From a legacy perspective, I think you would have to put Mel Blount up there from the Pittsburgh Steelers.
That's the first name I thought of. I'm glad you said that.
He changed the game. Like he changed where they used to could bump up and down the field. They had to put the 5-yard rule in because Mel Blount, and I don't know if you've ever had a chance to stand beside him. Mel Blount is every bit of 6'3", 200 plus pounds with these long arms where he could choke you out. He would be up there. Mike Haynes from the Raiders would be in the conversation as someone that wants to, as someone that is also, gosh, a gold jacket guy. I mean, there's so many guys that you can list. I would say for a younger guy, I had a chance to play with Charles Woodson.
He was on
and man, there are not many guys who could do the things that he could do very early in his career, just on instincts, intelligence, and just, I would say, bold arrogance. He's one of the best I've ever seen in terms of just believing that he's great and I'm going to go make plays because I think I'm great and you're going to find out that I'm great. And I would just be amazed at the stuff that he would do between the lines.
Yeah, he was on a couple other names that were thrown around was Rod Woodson, Darrell Revis.
Oh, man.
Mel Blount was up there.
Yeah.
We had fun with the conversation, and Tyvis, who's not here today.
Tyvis was clearly on the list,
yeah,
right?
Well, we have a guy in the show. He rotates in. Well, do you remember Tyvis Powell? He played at Ohio State. He was the national.
I do. I do remember.
Twice a week here. Do you remember your scouting report on Tyvis? Because we'll definitely tell him. Please tell us you were. In his mind, he was the number 1 overall prospect in the class, and he was a travesty he went undrafted. But
I wish that I could pull out an old report on Tyvis. I don't have a report, but it's funny because here's the thing, and I can agree with Tyvis. We are always legends in our own mind as the years get away from when we play. Like it is always great. The only thing that brings you back to reality is when you watch those old highlights and you look at those big old shoulder pads and you're like, you know what? I might not have been as sweet as I thought, but I'm going to let people think that I was a great player back in the day.
Yeah, Tyvis, we have that's his national championship MVP trophy.
Yeah,
in studio.
In studio.
He doesn't let us forget that.
In studio.
Yeah, so Tyvis is a great guy.
Unbelievable. That's unbelievable.
Yep.
That's an unbelievable flex. I'm gonna bring my trophy and drop it.
And just let it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
It's like I don't even need this. I got replicas. This is just one of my trophies.
It's like his business card.
He's on 2 days a week, Bucky. We do 5 days, 10 hours a week. He's on 4 of the 10 hours, but we cannot do a show without his trophy in the background. Bucky Brooks, the legend. Thank you for coming on.
Appreciate you,
Bucky.
If you ever want to come back,
hey man, thanks for having me,
It
guys.
was an honor.
Thank you, man.
Hey, appreciate you, man. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Bucky. Man, he's
great.
He's phenomenal.
He's great.
I've read a lot of his stuff. I listen to the podcast. Obviously, some podcasts have video components. I'm sure theirs does. I haven't seen him much on camera, but
He got
as well spoken as anyone we've had on. That was awesome.